worked for DLA Disposition Services, which started out as Defense Realization and Marketing Service, for 33 years. I actually was introduced to DLA in 1984 when I served in the United States Army, and I was stationed at Defense Construction Supply Center, Columbus. And it was then that I knew I wanted to work for DLA. When I started as an intern, the purpose was to train me in all aspects of property disposal specialist type work, as well as environmentalist specialist, because I was also an 028. And when I started, everything was done manually. There was no automation per se, very little. Everything done was on manual 1348s, manual SFs 122s, 123s, big stacks of paper with your inventory. And we would basically take everything off of documents and then go to the key punch card machine, which had the big clunky keys, and we'd punch everything out in the 80 card column format, which is being used today through the mill strip process. That has never, ever changed. It remains the same. So when I started out, everything was manual. And once I get trained in Battle Creek as an intern, I had DRMO, that's Defense Realization Marketing Office Hill, as my assignment. So once there, I was trained in receiving, warehousing, environmental, scrap handling, precious metals breakdown, sales, and my favorite, of course, realization, transfer, and donation. After a few years, DAISY came in, and it replaced the manual process where everyone had to learn to operate a computer, which was scary for a lot of employees, especially in receiving or warehousing. We had a lot of people very hesitant to work on a computer because they were afraid of it. But even then, going to a computer, we still ran sort of everything as a batch in-house. And we also had retail sales, local auctions, besides the national sales. And local auctions were always nice because I remember working sales, especially automotive sales. You think items sat around in a distribution center or a depot for years. They were covered with a greasy black dirt. So when you'd leave work, you were covered with that dirt. So when we get to work an auction, we actually get to dress up. So that was always really nice. And we get to meet the buyers face to face. You get to learn who they were. You met their spouses. Sometimes they'd bring their children with them. So you get to meet the whole family, and there was a closeness to it. And they were the regular customers over and over and over. So that was very enjoyable. And I also not only helped with registration for those local auctions, but I'd also be a recorder, which you had to be on top of your toes because you had to pay attention to people as they raised their paddle, to make sure you didn't miss a bid. And then we recorded the number and hand-scribed it. And we also had an adding machine where we had to add. You didn't dare want to make a mistake. So that was kind of antsy at times, but it was fun. Looked forward to it. And during my career, I did 3 major cleanups. One was in New Jersey for a U.S. Naval Sea Cadet group that misused the excess property they get through the program. It was actually surplus. And the second one was for the military-affiliated radio system in New Jersey on the Outer Banks, and that was a massive project. The third one was in Hammond, Louisiana, and that one was not a program that we'd oversee. It was a U.S. Army officer who had taken out property from various DRMOs and was going to start his own museum. So he misused the property, the items, and in all 3 cases it was misuse. And I think back throughout history when we went through base realignment and closures, there were 5 major time periods which realigned or closed 350 sites. So every time a site closed or downsized, that impacted customers, RTD, and those customers that relied on local auctions. They were impacted. And what you have to remember, the customers in the RTD world that were impacted were those customers who had to travel to pick up. So as far as budgets, it really hurt them to say, okay, now I can't drive 50 miles, I have to drive 500 to the nearest site. Probably my favorite part of the job. There's two favorite parts, but working disaster relief, humanitarian aid, disaster relief, they sort of go hand in hand. When we look at humanitarian assistance program, we're dealing with requests that come in from the State Department and that's to be used overseas. And it's usually where a country, their representatives go through the U.S. Embassy into the State Department and come into us. And the humanitarian assistance program is considered a Department of Defense special program. More recently, with hurricanes that have hit the Virgin Islands, those were probably more of the recent requests, and COVID-19 requests also coming in from U.S. aid. Well, going back to HAP has also given up many items this past year for COVID-19. So we could get those items back to our Department of Defense customers. So once again, it's just not all giving to humanitarian assistance. They've also given back to us, which is really awesome. The third part of this is disaster relief at the state level, state and local government. And in there you may also find Law Enforcement Support Office coming in for request and the DoD firefighter program. Law enforcement program's been around for quite a few years. Firefighter program actually started in 2006. And people don't realize that the law enforcement agencies, firefighting agencies, not only focus on law enforcement or fighting fires, they also are the ones who are on the front lines when there's disaster for rescue. Well, anytime there's a disaster, you're thinking about the people who've lost everything. Not only their homes, but their businesses. And you think we can't get items to them fast enough. That's for any disaster. And there's a sense of urgency. So we would start working probably around 5 a.m. I say we, and another person in the office signed to help me. And then on top of Harvey hit the other 3 hurricanes right after it. So we were busy, and we would work till late at night, sometimes 10 o'clock at night, sometimes midnight. That's not uncommon. What happens is if a field site comes in with items that we need, because we'll send out items needed. The field site comes back and we'll go check with the customer, say, do you need it? If yes, they bring it on record. Well, as soon as they bring it on record, we must put that order in after 5 p.m. each day when the inventory updates. So that wasn't even a requirement. We don't think twice about it. It's just something we do. It's your job, you know, and it's just, you're glad to help. And anything we can do to help, it makes you glad that you have the job that you have. These are 2 of my favorite things to redistribute, and most people haven't been around long enough to know the regulations. But while President Clinton was in office, he signed an executive order that was called the Food Gleaning Program, Food for the Poor through USDA, Food and Drug Administration, which allowed us to provide excess food directly to either federal prisons and or food banks / soup kitchens. So we would take the food and offer it up to GSA, and GSA determined which agency would get the items. Federal prisons got first option, and most of the food ended up in the early years going to soup kitchens and food banks. And when I talk about food, I'm not talking about meals ready to eat that the military personnel eat. We're talking about lobster, steak, condiments, baked goods. What the prisons cannot use, they go ahead and turn around and give to those local food banks or soup kitchens, which is a good feel especially with right now with COVID and so many people have lost their jobs and so on. It's nice to know that we're also contributing that way. After Hurricane Sandy hit the East Coast, there was $5 million worth of excess food. And so DLA, Troop Support, needed to work with FEMA and also work with DLA Disposition Services to make sure that we could get that food to food banks and soup kitchens. The food was stored at Albany, Georgia, and we worked with FEMA out of Chicago, I believe it was, and we were able to issue all $5 million worth of food to food banks and soup kitchens across the entire country. And they drove to pick up each one of them. So that was a real plus. So it's always good to get food to those who need it. And so I'm very proud to have been part of that. The other joy I've always had was finding homes for animals. And some are challenging. If we get horses, and I always like the regulations that state we can find homes for live animals. I thought, what other type of animal would we try to find a home for? So horses, if they're rideable, good condition, will get picked up by law enforcement. That's an easy move. A few years ago, I had 2 buffalo and a beefalo. I had to find a home for out of Alabama. The new commander at a base post didn't want them there. And the first thing I thought of was, I know the Native Americans have a program going back to their roots with herds of buffalo. So I thought I'll go there first because that only makes sense. And when they didn't want them, I turned to the state agencies for surplus property. I went to their national officer, who in turn checked around with some states, and the state of Georgia came through. So the 2 buffalo and the beefalo went to Locust Grove, Georgia, and they have what's called Noah's Ark. And it's rehab for children who have been abused, and it's also an animal sanctuary. So we did a good job there. We've been asked to find homes for chinchillas, mice recently, and they're pretty hard to find a home for because you always want to find a home where the animals are protected and safe. So we look towards sanctuaries or some place that can actually use them. Years ago, one of my coworkers had a group of goats, and the goats were used to eat grass around some nuclear facilities. So we always joked about the goats probably glow in the dark. But he found a home for them. So over the years, we get quite a few interesting animals. And like I said, some can be rather challenging finding a home for. But we usually come through, and they're always good news stories, always. Those are the fun things of work. It's like I was born to do the job. How could you not want to do it? Think about it. You issue property back to the Department of Defense, U.S. military, to keep them mission ready. You work with special programs of all types of variety to keep the first responders, whether it's fire or law enforcement. You prepare youth for the military. We deal with humanitarian aid, aid to other countries through U.S. aid, natural disasters. You find homes for food, for animals. I think of Defense Property Disposal Services, Defense Realization and Marketing Services, DLA Disposition Services. Powerful names. They got that way through an excellent reputation, which is based upon the work that people have done since 1972. Receivers, warehousemen, property accounting officers, RTD specialists, sales, contractors, the whole gamut. Dedicated to the job, understanding what the mission is, the regulations, having a sense of purpose, seeing value in what they do, not only supporting the military services around the globe in a time of peace and war, humanitarian assistance across the world, disaster relief, but every single day, the work that they do to ensure that we're in compliance and meet the needs of those customers. That's what it's all about. It's about the people. And every single worker should feel good about what they do. and they should have a positive attitude and know that they make a difference in the world.